This is the 46 of 46 podcast Summit Sessions, where we'll talk all things Adirondack, backcountry, and beyond. From high peak stories and adventures to trail tips and tricks, we'll dive deep into the heart of these mountains and the people who passionately climb them. Adirondack maps and spruce traps, bushwhacks and backpacks. It's all here on the 46 of 46 Summit Sessions.
I'm Thea J, and I'm a 46er, and you're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 46 of 46 podcast. I am back with another Summit session, and this might be the wildest story that I have had on this podcast yet. I have shown people who climbed the 46 high peaks without shoes on. I have had people on the show who climbed all 46 high peaks in less than a week. I've had people try to do it in almost 3 to 4 days. There have been unbelievable stories of triumph in the high peaks right here on the Summit Sessions. But this episode, this story, this little girl takes the cake. This past summer, 4-year-old Thea became an Adirondack 46er, the youngest of all time, 4 years old. And her dad is going to be right here with me tonight to tell us the whole story, because what a story it has to be. His name is Colt McElwaine, and he is now a 46er himself and the father of the youngest 46er of all time. Absolutely crazy. Colt, thank you for coming on the 46 of 46 podcast.
Thank you, James. It's truly a pleasure to be here. As they say, long-time listener, first-time caller. So it's a pleasure to speak with you.
I appreciate that greatly. So, wow, 4 years old. So just right off the bat, I know you and I were talking, and you had mentioned that you never shared this whole journey with people. It was just something you guys were doing, and then, you know, it caught on because the Adirondack hiking community, when something cool is happening, word spreads quite quickly. So take us back to the beginning of before you started climbing the high peaks, but take us back to when you were like, okay, let's go hiking. The very first hike, because I mean, she's 4 years old and she finished. Obviously, the journey started before this point. So take us back to what made you guys start getting into the outdoors as a family in particular.
Totally. So our Adirondack story starts way, way, way back. So my wife and I met actually 30 years ago this year up in the Adirondacks. Our families didn't know each other. Mine was from Boston. Hers was from Rochester, New York. And they both went and did a camping trip together just outside of Old Forge. And we were at the same campsite together. Our families, met each other. My wife and I became really good friends at that age. And our families kept going back year after year after year. And we stayed best friends. When we turned teenagers, we started dating. We started, going on bigger hikes and adventuring together over those summers, and ultimately got married and went on to have kids. So the whole Adirondack backcountry, thing it's a part of me from before I can even remember. In fact, from the time I was basically Thea's age. So when we finally had kids, we were in Ithaca, New York. My wife was in law school there at Cornell, and just looking to introduce, at the time, my one kid, Thea, introduce her to the outdoors. And so we started making some father-daughter trips up to the Old Forge area, actually, where we have a camp that we stay. And one weekend, we just wanted to mix it up. We went up to the high peaks, Lake Placid area, and just had this idea of, let's see if we can go for a hike. Let's see what she can do. We'd done a ton of hiking back home around Ithaca on the Finger Lakes trails and places like that. And from the time Thea could walk, she's been hiking. It's like we go every day. We'd go out, and it was her favorite thing to do, is explore outside. And it's how we spent time together as a family. So we knew what she was capable of. She had done, what is it called? It's not the Tupper Lake. What's the one, Bald Mountain and Rocky and Black Bear?
That's the Fulton Chain trifecta.
The Fulton Chain. Yeah. So she had done those hikes over that summer of 2020. And so we kind of knew that she could handle the Adirondack conditions. And yeah, we started on Cascade and had no plans to do anything other than that, and wasn't even sure she could make it, but it was just like a fun challenge for that day. Let's see how far she can make it. And well, she ended up making it.
Absolutely wild. Now, you said 2020 is when you did the Fulton Chain. So, I mean, was she 2 or was she?
So when she Yeah. So when she was not quite 3 is what I always say. So it's like 2 and 9 months, and so she's a climber, man. She has been forever. It's just, it's at the playgrounds, whether it's on rocks, whether it's on whatever. I always, the quote that people kind of latched onto was, I said, she's strong, she's brave, she's not quick. And,
sure.
Yeah, she really is. That's kind of her thing. She can go. And I would tell people, at home, a normal day is like, and you have a kid, so you understand this. It's like they jump on the trampoline for an hour, and then they run around the backyard for an hour. Then they go to the playground for an hour, and it's like kids go all day long. And so we would often use that energy in just these hikes where it's say, well, we're going to go out there. Maybe we'll be out there for 4, 5, 6 hours, but we'll take our time. We'll take lots of breaks, and we'll just sort of play our way through the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how it started. And before anyone starts to get any ideas of like, well, how could a 2-year-old possibly? It's like, oh, there was tons of hand holding and like, here's where we go around this section. It's like, it's not like she's out there with her map and compass, doing this all by
of course.
yourself.
You're a responsible parent then in that regard.
Yeah, you feel a little bit like a Secret Service agent when you're out there, just like scanning everything and watching her and keeping her protected and spotting her on everything. And so,
you have to. And I think we all probably kind of assumed that was the case. But what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It's because kids are always going, and every time I've gone hiking with my daughters, I notice that most stuff doesn't really even faze them. They just climb up. And, they're not quite as grizzled as we are at this age, it's just what they're doing. They're not breathing heavily. They're not doing anything like that. They're just, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to climb up this area, and then I'm going to climb up the next one, and then the next one. And yeah, it's always wild. And I've found pretty consistently that kids do better than you expect them. When they become, that like 9, 10, 11 years old, sometimes they're really not into it. And, the physicality of it definitely becomes more of an issue. But like that kind of age group, that like 4, 5, 6, man, kids do some wild stuff out there. And I have found that they just climb. They're not like, you're not out of shape yet at that age. You just keep going, and it's a beautiful thing.
And the ignorance is bliss at that age. Like they're
Definitely.
not sitting there in the trailhead going, all right, how many miles are we doing? And I don't know if I can do this. And, I feel like I don't want to come across as slow. So I'm going to go faster than I can to try to keep up with this other person in my group. Like all the stuff that affects us as adults that maybe make this challenging for us. They have no idea. They're just out there. This is a cool rock. This is a cool, mud pit, whatever it is. And, it's just one step after the other. So that first hike, I wish I had found your podcast before that. And I wish I had listened to your experience specifically with Cliff and Redfield, because
yeah, sure.
We made this mistake of climbing was easy as could be. We made it up to the top. It took a long time. We averaged, I think, like a 75-minute mile, but we made it up there to the top of Cascade. I'm FaceTiming my wife. Can you believe she did this? Like, she's incredible. And, just like you, right? I'm looking at my watch. It's only whatever o'clock. We should go over to Porter. It's so close. Why not go over to Porter, right? How much longer could that take if we average this? We make it over to Porter. It was okay. We started needing some breaks. Like, that little, what do you call it? The little coal there between Cascade and Porter. Like, we stopped there on the way back down. I let her take a nap for about 45 minutes. We just hung out. It turns out that Thea can go uphill. Okay. Going downhill at that age was really the challenge. It's almost like, it's like with anything in the high peaks, right? It's like people would always rather go up the cliffs than down. Climbing down took us a long time, and we got into like 2-hour per mile territory. It just, in retrospect, I would never do that again with my kid at that age. It was too much. It was too soon. The way down was too much. She had a great time. She could have cared less, but for me, it was just really like emotionally exhausting, physically exhausting.
It's a long day for dad at that point too, because exactly that, you have to be making sure she's good. And of course, ignorance is bliss. She's just out. This is what we're doing right now. But yeah, as a parent, you have a way different experience out there. So those long days are so mentally taxing.
I think back on that hike too, and I'm like, so for backstory, I'm just over 6'6", and at that age, she's like, I don't know, 3 feet. Right. So the hand holding experience, my back was killing me. It was a miserable hike. But afterwards, as with all of us, you forget that stuff pretty quick and you just remember the high points. And she was just over the moon. She loved it. It's like, to the extent that she could even talk, it's all she talked about. Right. And so we immediately kind of got back into planning of like, well, we want to do something like this again. What can we do and how can we do it more comfortably, safer, more responsibly? And that's what led us to deciding to basically backpack our way through the peaks.
Yeah, and that's a very, just reading your story, that's a very different kind of type of challenge that you're giving yourself when you're making, a lot of people can, they can attach all these mountains in one hike, but when you're doing them, you're backpacking, so every trip has to be these long overnights, and you can't necessarily do 3, 4, 5 peaks in one day. It becomes a totally different animal, and then adding on, you have a 4-year-old with you. It's really incredible. But let's get into it. So your next trip, you guys decided to camp, and take us through what that experience was like, and compared to Cascade and then Porter, what differed?
Yeah. So it was a few weeks later, we were heading back up to the Adirondacks to go to our camp in Old Forge, and we decided we're going to try it again and try backpacking. So I figured big slide, and I had done, I wasn't a 46'er, but I had done quite a few of these over the years as a teenager and stuff like that. And so I had done big slide. I was familiar with that. And I figured that would be a pretty good test to see how she handled. I mean, we had camped out in the backyard together, things like that, but we'd never done anything like this with her. And so, it's 2.9 miles or whatever it is to, I think it was the Howard lean-to, like right there by Johns Brook. We did that the first day, pretty smooth trail, absolutely no problems. Big slide from that side, I think is maybe just under 5 miles round trip. And it was another long day and it was slow miles, but it was really more manageable to be able to just, get up, start right there at the crack of dawn, and then take our time, enjoy the summit, work our way down for dinner. And yeah, it really felt like we had figured it out. Like after that, I remember, after that day being back in the lean-to for our second night. So for round trip, it was about 10 miles. And we did it over 3 days. And I remember thinking like, well, this was awesome. Like she had the time of her life. I obviously love being out here. And as a parent, you often will make the mistake of thinking, well, okay, now that I have kids, I'm not going to get to do this kind of stuff anymore. And so the fact that she so enjoyed this thing that we as a family enjoy and that I personally enjoy so much, it was like, that was when I really started to get hooked. I was like, well, let's keep doing this. Like what other, hikes, what other backpacking trips could we do that are, within this range of mileage and things like that. And yeah, it felt like we had, cracked the code.
That's great. And, telling someone that you did big slide over a 3-day period, people would be like, what? That's crazy. But that really puts into perspective just what you had to do with your child to make those miles happen, which makes it even all the more impressive when you start talking about these long trips like the Seward Range and the Santanoni Range. But we'll get into those. But you definitely cracked the code, though.
Yeah, you have all these people on your podcast that, you're always talking about the FKTs. We're like the SKT, like the slowest known time to ever complete these 46 peaks. Like no one has ever done probably as many hours and many days to wrap these up as we have.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty wild. So how long would you say your day was up big slide that day, for example, just to put into perspective what you did?
That was, like I said, my memory's foggy on, as these all the peaks start to blend together, but I think I remember that being about a 5-mile day. And I think it was in the ballpark of 8 to 9 hours from lean-to to lean-to, but that included, we at that time, 75 to 90 minutes per mile was sort of our sweet spot. And so we would just take lots of breaks, lots of gummy bears, lots of just hanging out, telling stories. And Big Slide especially is such a beautiful summit that we just spent a lot of time up there, chatting with other people and taking our time. But it was manageable. Like when a lot of people, again, they'll hear that, like, what do you were hiking for 7 or 8 hours. But again, you put it into the perspective of like, just look around at what your kids do all day. 7 or 8 hours really in the grand scheme of a 24-hour day, it was very manageable for her. And, she never got cranky. She never asked to be, carried or anything like that. And she took her time. Yeah,
it sounds like it. And when you guys do take breaks, what were those like? Was she huffing and puffing, or was it just like, I just want to take my backpack off and hang out on this stump over here? Because that's what I get from my kids. Like they're a little tired, but they more so just want to hang out. They want to stop and look around, and maybe I just am constantly moving too much. But that's what I found with me. How was it for you guys?
Yeah, it's the same. It's like we would take breaks because she got bored.
Yeah, exactly.
Not because she got tired. Like at that age, kids are not. I mean, at least her. I can't really speak for the kids, but she's never pushing. She's never like going over the red line. She's never trying to go quick. It's just it doesn't factor into what she's doing out there. Like she keeps herself steady. She keeps herself comfortable. And, maybe we had just done like a lot of scrambles or climbs or something. Or a lot of times it would be, we would get to the base of, some big rock slab or something. And I think she would look up at it and kind of get nervous for a second and want to stop. And we would chat for a little bit and, say, okay, you ready? Ready to tackle this? Okay. All right. After you, whenever you're ready, let's do it. And, but again, it just, for me, it's such a blur of like moment by moment, because from my perspective, the one thing I'm most worried about is like, you can't let your kid get into that zone where like a temper tantrum or that kind of like, you can't let them get too upset. And so it's this constant balancing act of like keeping them entertained, keeping them engaged. Are we talking about a movie that we watched? Am I asking her, a quiz about different animals? And just, it's so mentally taxing for me that it's just, it's hard sometimes for me to even think like what's going through her head, because she's so distracted by, she's talking about this, she's answering questions, she's looking ahead on the trail, that, the hours while they were slow, they did pass pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Now, are there any situations that you remember off the top of your head that were particularly challenging for her to climb? Because like in my mind, I want to know, okay, the Allen slide, the cliffs on the Saddleback Cliffs. I know with Gothics, you guys went up the cable route from, so there's obviously that route too. Were there any specific situations that she was particularly nervous climbing up or down?
Right. So that first year it was Cascade, Porter, Big Slide, Wright, Algonquin, Iroquois, Esther, Tabletop, and Phelps. So that was we ended up doing 9 that first into the fall. And so everything, we backpacked our way through. We did about 3 to 5 miles a day, but we would get to more so going down than going up is where we would have challenges. Going up, she could always sort of figure out, a way up those slabs where she could just use what she always called her sticky feet, which has kind of become like her catchphrase now. She would go, Dada, my sticky feet.
I love it.
Just
I love
run up the rock slabs. It was going down, like she had she could butt slide down these rocks, but a lot of times it would be, if it got to the point where it was too challenging, it was me sort of turning my body into like a human ladder sometimes, where it's like, okay, I'll go down this ledge first. I'll lay down against the rock, and then I'll let her kind of grab onto my backpack and shuffle and lower herself down. So there were some nervous moments for me, a couple of those peaks I hadn't done before. And like I remember Phelps, for example, coming down, there's some pretty steep sections on Phelps. And I'm not proud to say that, we might've gone slightly off trail on a couple of those slabs, whereas, you like to walk on the rocks and not cause any erosion, but there was a few sections for her where, as a dad, I'm like,
sure,
all right,
I'll
add a couple 35-pound footsteps, just go that way,
Yeah, 100%. There's some situations too that I know just, from climbing in the high peaks so often, it's like, I'm always nervous going down them. And I'm always like, and I always think to myself, like, man, people with dogs, how are they doing this? But now it's like people with their children that are 3 years old and 4 years old, like, holy mackerel, what you were dealing with. It does help for you being 6'6" to help be the human ladder in some of these situations. But there's some spots that are like, holy crap. I can imagine taking her off the trail would be the way to go.
Yeah. And the other thing I figured out early on in that process was I got her so kids rock climbing harnesses often come in 2 parts. There's a waist harness and there's a chest harness. So I got a chest harness for her, and I would carry, at the time it was just a regular cord, but I ended up switching it to like kind of a bungee cord. And I would connect that to her sometimes, where if she was going to be climbing up something steep, I'd hook up what she would affectionately call Tevy, which was her tether basically. And I would climb up ahead and basically sort of belay her, where I found that it was a little more nervous for me to be underneath and spotting her as she climbed up the rocks versus going up, knowing that I had her connected to something. And that way, if she did take a slip or if she did take a fall, at least she wasn't going to, go tumbling down, back to where she started. So that gave me a lot of sense of security. And it also gave her a lot more confidence to not feel nervous. Like we had practiced with it back home, and she knew that, that she could count on that, and that if she did make a mistake or if she did, slip, that nothing was going to happen.
That's great. Teddy saving the day. No, that's very smart, and it's very intuitive to go that route. Makes perfect sense.
Right. So, but that was it. I mean, we finished that fall, and she was fully hooked. Like that whole winter, all she would talk about when she met people was climbing mountains. She would just, like, kids at that age learn to count to 10. She would just list her high peaks in the order of climb. People were sick of hearing about it. Like we would lay the map out on the kitchen table, and she had memorized where those 9 peaks were that she had climbed. And so we knew, that winter, that spring, it was always in the back of my head. Like, okay, this summer we're going to go back there, and we've kind of used up all of our easy passes here. So things are going to get a little more challenging, and we got to start kind of preparing for that. And yeah, that next summer we tackled some bigger stuff.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, I mean, yeah, so she was 3 years old then when climbing, Algonquin, Iroquois, right? Cascade, Porter, Big Slide, 3 years old. Crazy. Before we move on, so Algonquin, Iroquois, right? That's a huge day. And as far as camping goes, not a lot of options. Like once you start going up, you're going up. How did you guys split those up out of curiosity?
Yep. So that was another 3 days. We went McIntyre Falls campsite on day 1, which is about 3 miles. And then it's give or take about 5 miles to do the range from there with right Algonquin, Iroquois and back, and then another 3 miles out. So we did it over 3 days. Again, that first year, I made bad judgment calls in distance. Like we did it. It was fine. We made it home safe, but it's like Iroquois was too much. Mm-hmm. Porter was too much. And those first couple of backpacking trips, I kind of figured that out. Like it just takes a lot to kind of recalibrate your brain from like, I'm thinking, I did this in half a day. I did the whole range. And, you can't really compare sometimes trail to, is it a herd path? Is it this? What kind of rock is it? Like with Algonquin specifically, one of the things I never could have imagined that would have been a challenge for us was on those trails like Algonquin and Marcy that are really heavily trafficked. The slick rock gets so slick because there's so much foot traffic over it. Whereas on some of the more remote peaks, that rock is going to be really grippy. Whereas on Algonquin, you have so many people in their, New Balance tennis shoes just sliding down these rocks that it's almost polished them up. And so she had a hard time climbing some of that stuff and descending some of that stuff just because of the ability to get traction. So it's like little things like that we would figure out throughout the way. Like that day specifically, I remember we were actually out there at the same time that Katie and Bethany, was that Katie and Bethany, right?
Yeah, Katie and Bethany Garrison. Yeah.
Yeah, at the same time that they were doing their FKT. And I remember they had passed us. I think they were coming down Algonquin or something. And I remember being like, wow, like they're totally different universes here of like these people that are moving so quickly through these peaks versus these people that, like us, that are just inching our way up here. But yeah, it was a great day. It was beautiful views, but that was a big day. Like it really took that first year for us to figure out what our approach needed to be and really get everything dialed in. And in terms of gear too, like I was carrying so much extra stuff because I just didn't know what she would need and what was going to be I was carrying, you ever seen those little, like, it's like a little pop-up tent that's made for kids at the beach. And I used to carry that just to be able to like put her down to take her nap in sometimes because she needed like a soft, clean space. And sometimes she would want to take breaks, like just so much unnecessary stuff it turned out. But at the time we didn't know. And so it was like, it was hard. It was slow going, but we were hooked. Like I say, we were, we got pulled into that gravitational pull that is, the high peaks. And even at the time, like there was no thought of, we had considered like, oh, this will be cool. Maybe she'll become a 46'er someday. But it was, at the time, it was like maybe over the next 5 or 6 years. Like there was never any thought in our head of, oh, we could do this. And then next year, because in my mind, some of those harder peaks, it was like, well, she won't be ready for those for years. And then, lo and behold, she figured out a way to do them.
That's crazy. So what was it like for you when you're out there and she's taking a nap? I know you mentioned that in Cascade. I'm sure it happened plenty of other times. You're just kind of hanging out, waiting for her to wake up as she sleeps on little off the trail in the woods over there. Is that pretty much what that was like?
Yeah, totally. And it was actually, once I kind of accepted the fact that we weren't going anywhere anytime soon, it was really an enjoyable way to, instead of thinking of it in the terms of like, I'm out here and my goal today is just to get this peak or just to get this mountain and go home. Instead, my goal was, we're out here for the day. This is where we live today.
Yeah, exactly. I love it.
Most of it and enjoy our day. So if it meant, stopping to swim in the river, if it meant taking a nap, if it meant just hanging out and going slow, it's like, we got nowhere to be. We always wanted to be home by sunset, but like we got our headlamps if we need to. Like there's no reason to push the pace here. There's no reason to get anywhere sooner. And so, yeah, I would, just sit back, listen to a podcast, probably eat too many gummy bears and just hang out.
Cool. Yeah. That's what I like about backpacking or, anything that's just like you're doing these long distance trips. It's like, this is what I do today. I like that you said, this is where we live today. Cause I say that same thing. This is what my life is today. So I get there when I get there, I have all day, and it's like you're not rushing back to get to the car because you need to go do other things or you want to go do other things. You want to go home. It's just like, no, this is home today. It really gives a different perspective. So what was it like the next year? So obviously the winter came, winter went, and then you were about to start the next year. She was clearly chomping at the bit. What did you start with knowing what you learned the previous year? Which would have been this year then, I guess, 2022. So
it was 2021.
2021, okay.
So we started that year with Street and I. And so she had really grown up and matured, and she had been doing this bigger stuff over the winter. She got into we got her snowshoes and cross-country skis for Christmas. And, she was just so much stronger and so much more capable, but it almost comes down to like her ability to communicate, right? It's like just as she gets older, the more she can communicate with us, what she wants, how she's feeling, and the more that she can understand instruction. And the confidence was there both from her and from me that we could go do some bigger miles. So decided that we would start with Street and I that day. It's a manageable set of peaks, right? Like it's not a ton of elevation gain. It's not a ton of miles. It's a long day, but we were prepared for that. And so day went mostly perfect. I mean, it was smooth sailing. It was a little bit rainy, which, is some foreshadowing for the way home, but it was manageable, right? Getting back, what's the river there? Indian Brook or whatever. That was really our only challenge of the day, which was on the way there, we had been able to, walk hand in hand through the water, and, she was up to her waist, but it was like totally doable. The way home, the water level had gone up just enough, and rock hopping isn't quite an option for her. So that was our first, like, I call it like our Bear Grylls moment, where it's like,
sure.
All right, what are we going to do here? Luckily, some other hikers had gone through after us, and they had, I mean, just classic, like, cotton sweatshirt, running shoes, like, looks like it was their book bag from middle school, like, just did not seem prepared. But one of the things that they did that day that was great luck for us was they had brought this like really cheap rope, like the stuff you'd go get at Home Depot for $1 per foot or whatever. And they had strung it up across the river as a way for them, I guess, to like hold on to and balance. And so we ended up using that. I pulled it super tight. I tensioned it tight. And then I used that rock climbing harness with her to hook it up to her chest harness. And so we basically swam across the river and used this line to keep us from washing away. And it's moments like that I look back and I'm like, I was so terrified in the moment. And she was just like giggling and giddy and happy and thought it was the coolest thing that she could be doing.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, Street and I, it was a fun day. We came back a couple of weeks later and we did Giant and Rocky via the New Russia Traverse. So that's, you're starting at 43, you're going all the way through to New Russia. And we stayed at what turned out to be probably my favorite campsite of the entire 46, which was Lake Mary Louise, which is right down the backside of Rocky Peak Ridge there. And just beautiful day, manageable mileage, like 4.5, 5 miles each day. And, for anyone who's like, maybe they've done all the peaks and they're looking for a new approach, like that climb or descent on Rocky Peak Ridge down to New Russia is like one of the most beautiful stretches of trail that we did throughout the whole thing. Just this beautiful ridge line and views for days. And that was an awesome trip. Yeah,
if you're looking for a High Peaks hike this fall, that is a good one to put on your list because you have such an open ridge walk for so long down that hike or down that climb on the backside to New Russia. Highly recommend. I would agree.
So good. And it's like just thinking back again to these, like so many of the challenges, it was my job, and every parent can relate to this. Like it's my job to take on any suffering or any extra burden or, whatever it is to make sure that she's comfortable. And so for all these hikes, I think through her eyes, I remember how much fun they were. From my eyes, I remember these challenges that I was having, like Giant and Rocky was a particularly hot day. I didn't get enough water at the wash bowl, and started realizing as we made our way up that I was going to be running low for the day. And so it's like, well, obviously you're not going to ration the water between you and the 3-year-old. It's like, I'm going to let her drink whatever she wants. And that day it was hot, and she decided she was going to drink twice as much as she usually does. So I remember like filling up my little Sawyer pouch from the muddy puddles, just like get enough to get me there. So like, that was kind of the story of our journey. A lot of the times was like, Dad was suffering in quiet as I was like putting on a smile and talking about, Moana and the Lion King, and trying to keep her engaged. But
that is what we do as the fathers, though. That is our job, and that is our duty, to make sure they're good and sacrifice ourselves for them. So kudos to you. I appreciate that as a fellow dad, especially as a fellow dad of girls.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, real quick, let's talk about that. So what type of things did you have in your pack? What did you bring? Because I'm assuming you probably had all of your gear, both of your gear, and then maybe she had a backpack too, or didn't. Like, what type of stuff did you guys bring with you, and food on the trail? Because kids respond well to tasty food when they're out there and they're struggling.
Yeah, they do. So a brief backstory for me is that before kids, I made my living as a professional cyclist. And in the world of cycling, we have what in backpacking you call it ultralighters. In cycling, we have what we call the weight weenies, which is the people who are like really particular about weight. And so I had grown up my whole life always like weighing my bike equipment and being really conscious of not carrying a lot of weight, wherever we go. And so that kind of trickled into backpacking for me. Whereas I've always, looked for the lighter weight options and had the Z pack, like the super light packs and things like that. So even with all that said, my first pack the very first year was tipping out close to 40 pounds fully loaded. I like to carry a lot of extra. I know you say this too, you carry a lot of water, just a lot of gear, a lot of extra clothes, especially back then when she was, falling in puddles left and right. I would carry an extra pair of hiking shoes for her because she really didn't like getting her feet muddy. By the second year, by the time that we were doing things like the Giant and Rocky, I had whittled things down to just about 18 pounds, including the day's food and water and the bear can and everything else. And so that looked like 2 sleeping bags, one regular one for me and then one for her, which was it's what they call an alpine hybrid bag, which is designed to be used as like almost an emergency bivvy for like alpine ascents, where the insulation only comes up to your waist, and then it's meant to be paired with like a really heavyweight belay parka, like a really heavy duty down jacket. And so for her, it was perfect because I just could, cut off the top little liner part, and then it was almost like a children's size sleeping bag, but it was made to the quality and made super lightweight to where it, the thing stuffs down into like half of a Nalgene or something. So we take that. We had a pretty lightweight hammock that spent a lot too much money on, but it was just trying to get that gear weight down. And then just your typical stuff, like, so 2 sets of, my rain gear, her rain gear, my sleep stuff, her sleep stuff, extra socks. And then that big old bear can filled with every, fun, sugary snack under the sun.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I forget. I mean, even as you were telling me that, I was like, oh, that's right. They're backpacking all of these trips. So he's going to have to carry a sleeping bag, and he's going to have to carry all these things each time. So it makes perfect sense. And also, so you went with the hammock, so obviously that's a lot lighter weight. I'm assuming you both had your own hammocks. And then the other question is, by carrying her extra shoes too, how often was she switching shoes? As she doesn't like to get muddy. Unfortunately, this is a rough spot for that that quirk.
Right. So we rotated, but I mean, we would do lean-tos, we would do hammocks, we would do tents. And so I think that year we mostly carried, we had this MSR, it's a 1-person tent, but she's barely makes up a full person as it is. So that was always fine for us. And then, in terms of shoes, she would, and we had 2 hammocks for when we did do that. When, in terms of shoes, she got pretty good at avoiding the mud. Like I say, like she made some questionable line choices out there where it's like, if I saw a grown adult walking in some of the places she walked, I'd say, let's walk through the mud, right? Let's walk through the puddles. But you're not going to argue with a 3-year-old when you're 5 miles from the nearest road. So a lot of times she would, kind of hop around the side. She'd hop on the, on whatever the down trees were. And then we also kind of figured out this method where if it was a particularly, sometimes you just get those trails where there's no mud for 3 miles, but then there's just that one boggy section where it's like, do I really have to get my feet covered and get my socks all wet just for this one section? So what I would do for her is kind of go ahead, hold her hand, and then let her use my feet as like little lily pads. So she could, it's like, again, dad sacrificing, his comfort and
I love it.
His socks, but that tended to work for us. We kind of figured out a way to do this little, like, you call it the rock hopper, but it was like the foot hopper, like from dad's foot to a rock, to a tree, back to dad's foot. And that tended to work for us, but still I'd say we would change shoes, pretty much either once a day if it was a particularly muddy day, or if it was going to be an overnight, it was like, okay, we'll have one for today. We'll make our way to camp, and then you'll have a fresh, dry pair for the morning with your clean socks.
That's a great technique and a great strategy that you guys have employed out there. Very cool.
And more than 2 pairs of socks too. So like 3, 4, 5 pair of socks, because a lot of times, even when your feet get wet or your shoes get wet or your shoes get muddy, just putting on a fresh, dry sock is pretty important. And finding shoes that fit. I mean, anyone who has kids who's tried to hike knows how hard it is to find appropriate footwear that's not just like, the $15, quote unquote hiking shoes that you find on Amazon. It's like there's very few companies that make them, and there's very few companies that make them in really small sizes. So that also just took us, from the start of Cascade to her finish on Marcy, she went through, I think it was 7 different shoe sizes. Mm-hmm. So different sets of hiking shoes throughout the entire, because every time her foot would go up a half size or whatever, we really wanted to make sure we weren't getting into blisters or any of that territory. So having the right fitting stuff, the right fitting, like good wool socks that are appropriate for kids, all that stuff was like just so much of the behind the scenes headache was like, she wants to do this, she can do this, but how do we figure out all the stuff around it to facilitate it and make it safe and make it comfortable?
Yeah. It sounds like it would have been an expensive journey for the McElwaine family, but that makes perfect sense. I have a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they outgrow their clothes quite quickly. So I totally get that, especially with hiking boots. Man, was she able to communicate to you, like, if the boots weren't feeling well? Because I know with my kids and kids in general, it's like, hey, how's the shoe? It's fine. Okay, cool. I don't really know if that's good or not, but okay, well, I'll just take your word for it. Was she able to tell you that?
The number of conversations we would have where I would sit down with her and I go, too big or too small? Too small? Okay, is it too small? I guess maybe too big. Like, you're totally right.
Yep.
Trying to get them to communicate what it takes. So maybe an important thing to note here is, like I said, we had done a lot of hiking before we ever got to our first high peak, and we did a lot of hiking outside of the high peaks, back home in Ithaca, and then eventually we moved back to Boston. But we were on the trails all the time, like almost every day we were going out we're really lucky to live right at the base of a really good trail system here just south of Boston called the Blue Hills. And we were in there all the time. So we never went to the high peaks with gear that wasn't thoroughly tested. Maybe we had figured out that set of shoes wasn't quite ready for her yet, or they were a little too small. Like we tested that out before we got out there. But yeah, it was a headache the whole time trying to figure out, socks and shoes and shorts and the right kind of underwear for little, just everything that goes into it. But it also was part of the fun. I mean, it's in my nature. Like since I stopped racing, I coach other athletes. I coach cyclists and runners and triathletes. And so planning and preparation and all that kind of stuff it's right up my alley. It's what I enjoy doing anyway. So it was a fun challenge. And like, yeah, it was certainly expensive, but that's what we chose to spend our money on during, we didn't take other trips. We weren't doing other things. This is, kind of COVID times as well when we started. So it's like everything else is closed down. So like everybody else, we headed up to the mountains.
That's great. It sounds like a book written by you about this journey would do quite well. And I feel like people would really like it. And it would be a very beneficial thing about people being able to hear and read and see exactly, how something so crazy and incredible like this story is laid out like that. So it's very awesome stuff. Now, there's a couple hikes in particular that I want to know about. So the Lower Great Range, the Dix Range, the Seward Range, and the Santanonis, and Allen. So I guess that's 5. So those
right.
are just those are brutal for any person, let alone
let
me
add one more to the thing, because I want to tell you about the finish of 2021, because that's where I realized that she could actually do the 46 and that it wasn't going to take 10 years. So we put this route together. I kept feeling like after every hike I'd look at the map and think, man, we really used up all of our, like, there's no more easy ones left. There's just nothing, and that's something that's relatable to anyone who climbs these peaks, right? It's like you finish Giant, you finish Cascade, and you start to think like, well, geez, how am I going to do that? And some of the most remote peaks and some of the hardest ones to get to are right there in the heart of, Cliff, Redfield, Skylight, Gray, Marshall, etc. And so one night I was just looking at the map and going through it, and I started measuring, well, how far is it from here to here, and how far is it from this lean-to to that lean-to, and we put together what throughout this entire thing was our most ambitious undertaking. Period. And we look back on it, we call it the TJT, the Thea J Traverse. And so
nice.
It's kind of like a nod to the Bob Marshall Traverse, and like this great big loop. So it was a 6-day, 5-night traverse from the lodge to Upper Works. And we hit Colden, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, Redfield, and Marshall over 6 days. And we did that end of September, early October of 2021. And it was like 4 to 6 miles per day, some really challenging climbs, but that was where we figured out, like, okay, we can be out there this long, we can figure this out. Once you do, Skylight and Cliff and some of these other mountains, like if she can do this, she can do anything. And so that was really a big confidence booster for us, and just such an amazing trip. Like, we just had so much fun. Anyone should be so lucky to get to spend that many days out there in the Adirondacks. That
sounds like an awesome trip just in general. As you were saying that, I was like, oh, taking that route and going from there to there and hitting those mountains over a 6-day span, because I'm always just like, go. We've been on the summit for 10 minutes. We got to keep moving. That's kind of how my mentality is. So that, just listening to the Thea J Traverse, sounds like a really good time. Yeah, sure. Yeah. I love it. That sounds like that's a great hike right there. Let's all add that to our list. And over that amount of time, because then you really get to spend the time in the woods, and you're not rushed and you're not trying to get back to your car. It's just like, this is life today. And what a new appreciation you tend to have for the high peaks in particular, or the outdoors in general, when you're able to, look around and not be rushed to be anywhere else but where you are in this exact moment.
Exactly. We spent a night at Lake Arnold, and we, hung out by the water for hours and had a great day. And when we climbed Marshall, we made the little side quest over to the airplane, and I think we were there for it felt like we were there all day, but it was probably like 90 minutes that she was just playing in this airplane. When you fill out your forms and everything, Marshall is most consistently the peak that she lists as being her favorite peak, which very few people say Marshall is their favorite.
Yeah.
Their favorite. Like, not a great view. It's not a great, it's not a great day if you do it as a day trip. But like, for her, when you look through her eyes, it's like that airplane was, there's no toys out in the woods. And so this was like this incredible playground that someone had dropped over there on the side of a mountain.
The innocence of being a child. I love it. I live for it. That's great. It is fun. There's an airplane. There's an airplane in the woods. What's
everyone should take the time to make that little side trip over. But yeah, after that trip, like, Cliff was terrifying, but we did it. The floating logs were terrifying, but we did it. Like, we did it in the rain, which no one should ever have to do. But like, we figured it out. We got super wet, but being able to make it through that, and I couldn't tell that story without giving credit to my amazing wife, who hiked in with my 2-year-old at the time, my 1-year-old on her chest, and then on a backpack on her back to bring us a resupply of food after 3.5 days. So she carried, I think it was like 75 pounds that she carried in from Upper Work.
Amazing.
To meet us just above Lake Colden to swap out bear cans and give us another set of food and some dry clothes. So it was a full family effort, but that's what our family does, and that's what we find fun. Other people want to go to the water park, and we want to go into the mountains.
Yeah, I love it. I'm right there with you. That's great. My type, I'm not a sit at a pool type of vacation person. I'm like, okay, if we're going to go here, what are we going to do every single day? Like, I want it to be jam packed with things outside. So I totally get that mentality. I'm the same exact way.
Cool. And I think an important thing to note for parents is like, I talked to the parents who would come to me throughout this thing as we met each other on the trail, and they would ask advice. And like, a lot of times people would focus on like, well, how do you keep it fun, or how do you make it fun? And I think it's important to remember that you don't always have to be doing fun things with your kids. In fact, sometimes it's really valuable and important to do hard things with your kids. And like Thea, she loved it. She was giggling most of the time, but when you're walking through the floating logs in a rainstorm and it's 48 degrees, like, we're not having fun, but she could appreciate the challenge of it, and she would feel proud of herself in a way that she never would, accomplishing something that was easy or maybe even, quote unquote age appropriate. So I think challenging your kids and pushing them in a controlled environment where you give them the chance to surprise you and you give them the chance to surprise themselves, like the growth that we saw in her throughout this journey is really what made us want to keep going back out. Like, it's fun to climb the peaks, and we're like in the back of our heads, we're working towards this goal of 46, but like none of that in itself is enough reason to go out there and kind of suffer through it. But watching how she would like overcome these things, and the person that when she got back, and you could really tell like, oh, you learned this out there. Like you're confident to do this now, or you think of yourself this way because of, these lessons that you're learning on the trail. And so that was invaluable.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like you're like at my dinner table at night, listening to that last bit of stuff you were talking about. I mean, I tell my kids all the time, it's like, life is hard. We can do hard things, though. We can accomplish these things, and everything isn't meant to be fun. This is how you grow. This is how you learn things. And I could go for hours on this subject right now, but I don't even want to get myself going on the tangent, because you just hit the nail on the head. But I'm right there with you, brother. I think you're raising your kids right with that mentality. Right. Life is hard, and we can do hard things. We don't need to shy away from it. We go hit it head on, and that's how we grow, and that's how we become a stronger person for it. So take me through now those other hikes that I mentioned, Seward, Allen, Santanonis, and that in the kind of western high peaks area. What were those like? Obviously, there's a lot of spots to camp, so I guess with the Sewards, I probably can guess how you guys did it. Just take us through those hikes. I'm personally really curious. Yeah,
so it was the same philosophy of, we're going to backpack our way through, we're going to make it manageable mileage. But by the summer of 2022, she was way more capable of 7, 8, 9, 10-mile days. And her pace had increased. Like, we were now doing, I think we did like a 25-minute, when you start that, we did the Dix Range, for example. I think that was the first. Was that the first? Yeah, that was the first trip we took this summer. So she was at we were at 20 high peaks coming into this year. And after the winter of the winter leading into this summer it was so annoying talking to her all the time. And at that point, she fully understood what a 46'er was. She would talk about it all the time. We knew that school was starting in the fall. So we had kind of made this decision, like, look, we're going to figure out these weekends here. And I think there's a way to get this done by the end of the summer. And that way we can like put a bow on it and go into this next chapter of starting school, and like not have this hanging over, the next year. So we really kind of spent a lot of time throughout the spring planning our routes, figuring out what we would do. But the Dix Range, we did it from Elk Lake. I think the total mileage for that trip was somewhere in like the 20-mile range, but we broke it into 2 days. So we went into, I always forget the name of the lean-tos, but whatever that first campground is there, right at the base of the Macomb slide.
Sure, yep. Where you walk right through people's campsites to continue on the trail.
Exactly,
yep.
Yeah. So got there, claimed a lean-to. I mean, this is like the greatest luck ever, but we stayed in so many, uphill and feldspar and all these lean-tos. We had every lean-to basically to ourselves every time, which was just great for like a kid that goes to bed super early and like wakes up and screaming in the middle of the night because she got stuck in her sleeping bag or like whatever. Like, that was great. So we set up camp there. And every one of these hikes that you list, there was always something in it that was like, I don't know if we can do this. And for the Dix Range, it was the Macomb slide. Like, the way the mileage worked out, it meant heading up that route. And it was nervous. It was nerve-wracking. It was, again, for me, it was sketchy, but she just I just don't know how else to say it other than like, she's just a climber. Like it's one foot in front of the other, it's hands and feet. And the lack of fear that she has, that so many of us have when we go to do something like that, when we think about like the consequences and the exposure, like I'm nervous, I'm behind her, I'm doing everything I can to spot her and keep her safe. But for her, it was just like, it's another obstacle. And it was really fun to see her do. So that day we did Macomb, and then down Macomb to, what am I saying here? Macomb to South Dix to Grace back, and then came down, I think it's Lillian Brook, herd path back down around. And that in itself was, I'm forgetting the mileage, but it was something like a 10-mile or something loop. Spent the night and then had to go back up Lillian Brook the next day for Huff and for Dix, which it's not the most efficient way to do it, having to climb back up, twice, but there's not enough time in the day, and there's not enough juice in her legs to go hit that whole range in one day. So two really big days, but two beautiful. I mean, the Dix Range, it doesn't get better than that, right? Like those ridge walks and the views, and Grace is such an amazing peak. And throughout this whole thing, like the stories of, I assume most people who listen to this podcast know, but Grace named for, and can you pronounce her last name for me?
I believe it's Hudawalski. I've never heard anything other than that, but that's what I'm pretty sure that's the pronunciation.
I'm always reading it, but never pronouncing it. So throughout this journey, like we really kind of started telling Thea a lot of stories about the Adirondacks and stuff. And we had really made this character of Grace who would appear in all these bedtime stories. And so it was really fun to do that peak and tell Thea the stories of like these other girls and these other women that were out there, because 90 whatever percent it felt like of people that we would see on the trails were men and boys. And so anytime she saw like a woman out hiking by herself, or a group of women, or a group of girls, like it was so exciting for her. And she would look at, like, I remember, I'll never forget her looking at me, on what was it? It was, I just said I'd never forget. I think it was on Giant, but we passed this group of women, and she was like, her face lit up, and she goes, "Dad, girls hike too." And I shed a tear, and I was like, yeah, they do. And they can do everything that anyone else can do. And so, Grace was particularly special, to go to that peak and the Dix Range. It was long. I don't want to ever go down or up Lillian Brook ever again, but it was a good range. Yeah,
I bet. I mean, if somebody said to you right now, "Hey, you want to go into the Dix Range and go up Lillian Brook right now?" you'd say, "All right, fine, I'll go." We all say that. We all say we'll never go back. I said I'd never go back to Cliff again, and I was there a couple weeks ago.
Right.
Yeah, totally. That's exciting stuff. That's great. So I assume in the Seward Range that you guys probably camped at one of those 3 or 4 lean-tos at the bottom, and then walked in one day, climbed the range, came back, and then walked out the next day. 3 days. Is that a good guess based on your formula?
It's a close guess, but so here's where things got interesting, right? When you start mapping out, especially the Seward Range, the Sewards, the Santas, you start to get these awkward routes where you're going out and back to Emmons, right?
Yep.
Not these perfect loops like you can make on or like an easy traverse. So was it the Seward? Let me go back here to. Let me start with the Santanonis, actually, because this will give some context. So the Santanonis was the first range where we looked at and we said, this doesn't quite work with where the campsites are located. So you have the Bradley Pond campsite or Bradley Pond lean-to, which is like maybe 4 or 5 miles in from the trailhead. And then to go up the Bradley Pond Trail, I guess, to Times Square, Santanoni, Cooksacrogga, Panther, it was too big of a day for us to get in one trip. And I really, after doing the Dix Range that way, I really didn't want to go up and down Bradley Pond, that Bradley Pond Trail twice. That was the kind of stuff that was just so hard for her. Like the rock slabs, the cliffs, even the mud weren't so much of a challenge. It was like the riverbeds with those, like those exercise ball sized boulders, just one after the other, that you and I just hop across and we just step. But for her, it was this like really endless slog of climbing up them and climbing down them and climbing between them. And so trails like that took forever. So that's where the hammocks came in. We figured out, all right, some of these campsites aren't going to work for us. We're going to need to make do below 3,500 feet, 150 feet off the trail, whatever it is. And so I'll let you try to guess for the Santanoni Range. What would you imagine would be the worst possible place to camp? Maybe in all of the high peaks.
The worst possible place to camp in all of the high peaks. Please tell me you guys didn't stay at the Cooksacrogga Bog.
You nailed it.
Oh my goodness gracious.
So the way the mileage works out, it's about, it broke it up into about 2 7.5 mile days. So so you're up on these ridge lines, everything's above 3,500 feet. And for those who don't know, it's, your legal camp options are below 3,500 feet, not near a water source, not near the trail. And so just the way that range worked out, we bushwhacked about 20 minutes, I think it was south of right before you cross the bog, and we set up our hammocks in the middle of the woods, and it was just the grossest. It was just the buggiest, again, she didn't care. She had her full blown bug net suit over her whole body. She's eating her mac and cheese and eating her chips. Like, she could have cared less. But I remember thinking, like, I'm pretty sure not a single living soul has ever voluntarily but again, that's what it took. And where there's a will, there's a way. And again, I hope, obviously there's going to be parents that listen to this and think like, oh, that's cool, I could do that with my kids. But for the other people out there that are just nervous of like, well, I can't do that, or I couldn't possibly, like, there's a way to get these done. There might not be a way to do, the sexy version that everyone, I did 35 miles and 14 peaks today. But like, if you're willing to put in the time, if you're willing to put in the effort, there's a way through.
And there's no rush. If it takes you, 2 days to do big slide, 3 days, it takes you 2 or 3 days to do big slide. Like, you can do it that way. You can make it an adventure, and it'll be all that better the next time. Now, how was she sleeping in the woods? Obviously she's fine with it, but how did that kind of that develop throughout the trip?
Yeah, great. I mean, it's like figuring it out ahead of time, what kind of sleeping bag, what temperature you need to be. When she's 3 years old and 2 years old, like, there's still diapers involved overnight. And so, figuring that whole thing out. And, but yeah, she was, it's just kids, man. Like, kids fall asleep anywhere. They're not interested in like, well, what, is the insulation value of my sleeping pad? And like, you put them down, they fall asleep, especially after a full day of hiking. So she always slept fine. I joke around sometimes that, people say like, well, what was your most nervous, moment when you were out there? And I always say, like, the most nervous I ever was when I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would look over and she would be like in a little ball at the bottom of her sleeping bag. And I think, oh my gosh, she's going to suffocate. I'd have to like fish her out and grab her head. And like, that was always a little bit nervous, but we always stayed warm. She always did a good job. And
that's great. So sleeping in the woods didn't faze her then at all.
No. And again, it's like this whole thing of ignorance is bliss. Like, kids aren't born being afraid of the dark. That's something they learn from shows or scary stories. Like,
totally.
Like, she didn't know any different from the time that she was old enough to know what we were doing. It was like, this is what Dad and Thea do on a Saturday night or a Wednesday night. Like, we sleep in the woods, we sleep in a lean-to. She loved the hammock. It was, like being, back in the womb or something. It's like, kids love being like, what do you call it? Like swaddled or whatever.
Sure.
It was like, she slept literally like a baby in that thing.
Very cool. That's great. So as we start to wrap things up here, tell me about the finish. We got to hear how the final hike went. Yeah.
And that was, of all the things that I kind of psyched myself out about, because a lot of these things you get really nervous ahead of time and you get there and you're like, like, you hear so much about the floating logs. It's like, well, there's a way to do it. You can, or the Cooksacrogga Bog, right? Like, there's a way around it a little bit. You don't have to, go up to your neck and swim. But the one of the things that I had never done before was Saddleback. And so I had never done the cliffs. And, the Saddleback Cliffs are so, I would argue, after having done them now, I would argue they're a little bit overhyped. I think
Agreed.
For people who can do, if you've done Cliff, if you've done Seymour, if you've done all these other, you can do them. And I would even argue that you can go down them. I know a lot of people like really advise against that. Like, if you have decent climbing ability, if you're really comfortable on that kind of stuff, it's not like you're not on the top of El Capitan or something. Like, it's doable. But not having been there, it was the thing that I was extremely nervous about. And the way that we did these, again, where we're putting, peaks together and stringing these into multi-days, I really didn't want to have to make a separate trip to go just up the, whatever it is, the north side, the non-cliff side of Saddleback. and we'd already done the lower Great Range, and, Gothics was no problem and all this kind of stuff. But I really wanted to finish with Saddleback, Basin, Haystack, and Marcy. That's what we had left. Originally we were supposed to have, whatever. That's just how it ended, right? Like, we all try to plan our best I can, but there was days that, we had to leave one peak behind, and that's the way it came together. And she does some rock climbing back home. We do some rock climbing as a family, and she's more than capable, but again, just not knowing what was there. The last thing you want to do is get down Basin, look at those cliffs, and realize you can't get up them, and there's nowhere to go, and there's no way out. And so after months and months of just having this in the back of my head, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to do Saddleback? Are we going to have to do 2 different trips? I finally decided that we would go down the cliffs, and that we would rappel down the cliffs, that I would carry the extra weight, and I would carry some of her climbing gear. And she had practiced this, on some of the little rock climbing that we had done here, and she was pretty capable. And it was just crazy. It was like to be up there, to stand, to look at those cliffs, and to be setting up the anchors and running the rope. And there was a group of people that had just summited as I was, like, helping her get her harness on and helping get all the ropes out. And they were just looking at me like, who is this guy? Like, do we need like, I would always joke, like, 9 out of 10, no, more like 99 out of 100 realistically, but like the overwhelming majority of people look at you and like, oh, awesome job, guys, or like, you go, girl. And then you get that 1 out of 100, like kind of sideways look, and you're like, are they going to go call Child Protective Services when they get back to the, And so I definitely got a little bit of that feeling being up on Saddleback, like, just getting ready. But we did it. We, for anyone who rock climbs, so I carried some rock climbing cams, found some cracks to, wedge those into, anchor up, ran, I brought 30 meters of really thin, a rescue cord, and she did it. And she just zoomed right down that thing. And it became, I said this, but it went from being the thing I was so nervous about to being like the highlight of the trip for me. It was watching her. It was like, it really summed up, like, look how far she's come. Like, my 4-year-old girl has got a rope in one hand, a smile on her face. She's got, her own backpack on, and she's rappelling down these cliffs that, you go on these forums or whatever, and it's like everyone's, shaking in their boots about Saddleback. And it's like, we did it. We made it. We did it safely. I didn't feel like I put anyone at, any sort of like unnecessary risk. Like, it was just very controlled. And yeah, it was so exciting. And so that was great. Up and over Basin after that was fun. We hit Haystack that night just before sunset, and then spent the night at Snowbird. Got the hammock set up, and actually ended up running into these 2 guys right before dinner that ended up being professional photographers that had lugged up all of their, like, their flash and their gear, and they were up there to, like, I guess, do some sort of photo project. But they ended up asking if they could take some pictures of us and, like, test out their equipment. And that's sort of the beginning of where this story went public. Like, we, my wife and I don't have, like, public social media. We never talked about this journey ahead of time. Especially just, I didn't want the pressure of, like, people following along and feeling like we had to do this. Like, any given weekend, we would sit down and say, do you want to do this? Do you want to go for a hike? And if she ever said no, then we would have just stopped. But those photos ended up getting out on the internet, and they had shared some stuff. And so that's kind of like how this whole public thing came to be. But we had a great night at Snowbird. Again, one of the most beautiful campsites in the high peaks, up over 4,000 feet. And then up bright and early up to Marcy. And yeah, it was just the whole trip down Marcy was like, I just say it was a blur. It was like a hot day. We talked to so many people. Like, one of Thea's favorite things to do on the trail is to interact with the people that we would pass. Like, she really would start to crave somebody's attention other than mine. And she also started to realize that if we came across somebody, it was a reason to stop and to chat and take a little break. And so, especially on, like, the Seward Range, and when we're on Allen for 2 full days, like, you don't see a ton of people out there. And so coming down Marcy, and on a Saturday afternoon, it was just like nonstop high fives and people chatting with her. And so it was the best day of her life. I think she was just on cloud 9 the whole way. And then my wife hiked in again with my 2-year-old on her back. And for those who know the story of Grace carrying the birthday cake in her hands out to it was the hermit of in the Seward Range.
Noah John Rondo.
Exactly. So as kind of like an homage to that, she surprised us by hiking in and carrying a homemade like congratulations 46'er cake in her hands all the way to Marcy Dam. And
I love it.
we made it down. We sat on the wood there and had campers come over and join us. And she actually brought 2 cakes stacked on top of each other. But we ate cake and let it get dark. And speaking of which, hey DJ, you want to come in and say hi?
No, I'm tired of.
You're tired of playing upstairs?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm just talking to my friend right now. I'm telling him about our journey to be 46ers. Do you want to say anything?
No.
Hi, Thea.
All right. Here, go back upstairs and I'll come join you in a minute, okay?
Oh no, I'm tired of playing.
Sorry, Chase. All right. Hey, can I give you 1 second?
Okay.
All right. That would have been a new record, though. I think I made it almost an hour without being interrupted.
That was great. That was fantastic. We got to hear from the lady herself, so that was fantastic. Excellent.
You got a cameo. I told her she could play in a room, so that was the. It's been 45 minutes. I'm tired of being inside. Can we please go outdoors and do something?
Well, let's wrap it up then.
It was
so
a great
finish.
Yeah, it was a great finish. Marcy was great, and yeah, I can't believe it's over. You know, it's as I think a lot of people probably feel. It's like, well, now what do we do? Like, we've had this thing for all this time here that's been driving us, and we've had this thing to focus on and to capture our imagination, and now it'll be fun to just figure out what we do next.
Sure. I love it. And I get that question a lot from people, like, what do you do when you finish? And I always just say, like, it almost frees you, because when you're trying to go through the 46, you know, you're like, okay, I hit this mountain, now I got to go hit this one, now I got to hit this one. Now you can just, what one do you want to do now? What do you want to go back to? Like, there's no agenda anymore, and it just frees you up to, like, maybe I'm going to go hike Cascade 6 times now, because, like, I've already accomplished the goal that I had, and eventually a new goal will come. You'll hike one high peak in the winter, and you'll be like, okay, I'm hooked. Here we go. And the cycle continues. But yeah, that's great. So as we start, go.
Well, the thing we're really excited about is to get to go to some of these areas that we never got to see, because we were always taking like the shortest possible route and maybe not the most scenic route, or the most, like, we never went through Avalanche Lake. Like, I want to go experience that. And we never just did so many of those other fun trails. So yeah, there's, for anyone who's looking for more to do, like, there's a lot of trails out there. There's a lot of things to see. You know, throw in a plug for the Lake Placid Niner. That's something that there's a lot of good peaks on that list that we're excited to go explore as well.
Dare I say, the list is never ending of things you could do here. And, you know, you hike this mountain on a rainy day. Well, let's go hike it on a sunny day. Or you hike this mountain on a sunny day. Wait till you see what happens in the winter, or when it's not so nice out. Or, you know, you'll hike the summit from the totally other side of the mountain. Like, there's just always new things to go see and new things to go explore. And that's what's so great about this place. But as we start to wrap things up, there's always a few questions I like to ask people on the summit session. So for number one, and we'll talk about Thea for this question, what is something unique that you had to have in your backpack for Thea? Whether it was like something for comfort, something she liked to eat, just something unique to her that, like, had to be in the backpack.
Right. Well, a lot of, like, kind of boring specific gear stuff, like, you know, extra shoes and tiny sleeping bags. But, like, maybe one thing that's a little unique is that we had to have exactly 32 gummy bears per day individually packaged. Like, that was the formula. We figured it out. We would count them out together. You know, if that's 4 per hour for 8 hours, whatever the math works out to. Like, I don't know many people who are, like, at home individually counting out their, and making sure that they're, you know, disproportionately red ones, because those are the best. So that's
great. That's the best answer I've heard yet. It's like, I feel like anybody listening is just thinking, yep, I could see that. That makes perfect sense. That's great. So question number 2, why do you think the Adirondacks is a unique place? What is it for you that, you know, you guys, you've been here coming here since you were a kid, you and your wife met here, you know, what keeps you coming back here?
You know, I always wonder, and you could tell me, because you're someone, you know, you're from there, and I always wonder if this is, like, offensive in some way to people who really are from there, but, like, it feels like home to us. And I know a lot of people say that, and I know it's not. We live somewhere else, but in our hearts, in our, you know, like, when we think of where we are happiest, like, that's where the Adirondack Park is. And it's because of the memories we've made there. It's because of the friendships that we've made, like, throughout this journey. Like, there's so many people we met on the trail that we text with now. Hey, how was Thea's first day of school? Like, it's a really special place for all those obvious reasons. And Lake Placid specifically, for me as a former athlete and as a coach now and working with athletes, like the Olympic history is just a really cool part of that town that I hope a lot of people get to enjoy, like the Olympic Museum and going to see, some of the sites. It's a really special thing that there's not a lot of places like that in the United States, and Lake Placid is one of them.
Yeah. And I know that feeling, and I'm, I hear people say that all the time. It feels like home. And I actually know that feeling despite the fact that I live here, because I travel for work. I work most of the time when I'm working. When I'm on a job, I'm in New York City and occasionally in Boston as well, in your neck of the woods. But I go home on the weekends, and I might finish work at midnight, and I'm getting in my car and I'm going to start driving north. I don't always make it all the way home, but I always try to. But oftentimes, as I'm driving north, and I get into the Adirondack Park, or you get close and you smell the air, and it's just like there is a magical feeling. There's a lore to it, and I think that is what attracts everybody. There is a remote, mysterious ruggedness to this place, and that's why people feel at home. And again, I go to my house, but like, even if I was going to sleep at a trailhead because I was going to go hiking, and I wake up in the morning, like, there is it's hard to explain. It is a feeling of home. It is a feeling of being in the woods, and there's just something very special, mysterious, and magical about the woods here in particular.
I completely agree. There's so much, like, there's so many artificial elements to our lives wherever else we are traveling, and like these big skyscrapers and concrete and whatever, that I think to all of us, even if it's your first time there, to some extent, it's like, that's kind of what people are meant to be, like, out in nature and so to have this sort of unspoiled, forever wild, location, we all feel that.
Yeah, totally. And for my final question, why do you hike? Why do you enjoy the outdoors? What is it about the outdoors that keeps you and your entire family coming back for more and making that a big part of your whole life?
Man, kind of just touching on that, the answer to that last question, like, I also traveled for work for years as an athlete. I was all over the United States, all over the world, racing bikes and training and living in different locations. And there's something about being out in the woods. I mean, it's the Adirondacks for me, but for it could be anywhere. There's something about being out in the woods that just makes you feel like it's like a reset button. It's like, it feels like everything else is work. And when you're out there, it's almost like you're sleeping while you're awake. It's like, that's where your body recharges. That's where your body, gets revitalized. And so, for me, hiking, it's a fun way, especially now with kids. Like, kids, my daughter, she rides her bike, but she's not out riding, 30 miles on a road. And as a family, it's something that, like, from the time your kids are 2 and 3 and 4, all the way up to, we would meet families out there with like a 80-year-old father and a 50-year-old daughter that were out doing the peaks together. And it's like, it's just a great way to make memories and just learn different experiences, through the lens of this wilderness and these peaks.
Mm-hmm. All right, Colt, if people want to contact you, ask you some questions, talk to you, congratulate you, where can they find you?
Yeah. I'm online. Search my name, Colt McElwaine. Like, if you, again, we don't post anything publicly, but if you want to talk about, if you have kids or you're wondering about maybe how to do one of these peaks in the easiest way possible, happy to answer questions. But if you got time and you want to follow people on social media, don't waste it on me. Go follow. There's some amazing other women out there, beyond Thea, that are doing some great stuff. Like, go search some of them out and support what they're doing.
All right, there it is. Well, that's a good place to wrap it up. That is the absolutely incredible story of Colt and Thea McElwaine's journey to 46. Thea, 4 years old, the youngest Adirondack 46er, and what a life she is going to live. Absolutely incredible. Thank you all for listening to another episode of the Summit Sessions right here on the 46 of 46 podcast. If you like what I do and you like the show, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I would greatly appreciate it. Check out 46of46.com. I've got guide service, blog. I have the podcast on the website. There's so many more things available on the website. If you want to hike the Adirondack 46 high peaks and you don't know where to start, I have an ebook there that is a great spot Great place for you to start to get all of the information you need to know. But that'll do it. Check back on Fridays for new mountains, new stories, new guests, and new episodes right here on the 46 of 46 podcast. Remember to always leave no trace, do the rock walk, and if you carry it in, carry it out. See you on the trails, everybody.
How's it going, Thea?
Going great.
How do you like this rain?
A little bad, but I feel good.
Okay, good job.
Dada, it's for reason.
You got the map?
Yeah,
Thea, say, I did it.
I did it.
Did you hike Cascade?
Yeah?
Yeah. Did you hike Porter?
Yeah.
Your first 2 high peaks on the same day. I'm so proud of you, Thea.
Let's try it.
Hey, say hi to future Thea. Say hi, Thea.
Hi, Sia.
Say, I love you, Thea.
I love you, Sia.
Say, I'm so proud of you, Thea.
I'm so proud of you,
I'm
Sia.
so proud of you, too. Mwah. I love you so much.
Back for Real Summit. Woo, we found a sign. What's this mountain called? Sign.
Cooksakraga.
Cooksakraga.
What do you think of it?
Good.
Was it a good one?
Yep.
You happy?
Yep.
Thumbs up or thumbs down? Give me some. Knuckles. Proud of you.
There's the sign.
Seward Mountain. How was it?
It's great.
Give me some Knuckles. All right, break time.
Break time.
What do you want?
Yummies.
Yummy bears?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, can I ask you some questions?
Yeah.
All right, let's start off with, why did you want to be a 46er in the first place?
Because I loved Mommy and I wanted to be a 46er.
You wanted to be a 46er like Mommy?
Yeah.
Well, you did it.
Yep.
How does it feel to be a 46er?
Good.
Yeah. What about, of all the mountains you climbed, which one was the most fun?
Marshall.
What was so great about Marshall?
I don't know. I just loved playing and I loved how it had all that moss growing up there.
All the moss growing around the plane?
Yeah.
That was really cool. That was one of my favorite ones,
But
too.
it was yellow moss.
Yellow moss?
Yeah.
Weird. What was your favorite thing to do when you were hiking on the trails?
I loved it and I really liked trees and daisies
Trees and daisies?
and flowers.
Flowers, yeah. And what about mushrooms?
Yeah.
What kind of mushrooms were your favorite to find on the trails?
Oh, soft, wet ones.
The soft, wet ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool. All right, what about which high peak was the hardest one to climb?
Okay, this is number 4.
This is question number 4?
Yeah.
Okay, question number 4 is, which high peak was the hardest one to climb?
I'm guessing not Mercy, but I think Cooksakraga.
You thought Cooksakraga was hard?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
It
pretty
made me a
tough.
lot of tired.
Yeah. Do you remember where we slept when we did Cooksakraga?
Santanoni Range.
That was the Santanoni Range, yeah. But remember we had to sleep right near the Cooksakraga bog?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Pretty fun.
Yeah, pretty fun for you.
But you had to do, okay, swing, 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 swing.
Oh yeah, I had to swing your hammock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you had to like swing me around like this. Swing, swing.
I
swing,
know,
swing.
to help you fall asleep. Okay, let me ask you another question. Tell me about Cliff Mountain. I know that one was really, really muddy and that one was hard. Why was it so muddy?
I don't know.
What was it like at the bottom?
It was like a big bog with all slurpy in it.
So which bog was harder, the Cooksakraga bog or the Cliff bog?
Maybe both.
They were both pretty hard. What do you call the Cooksakraga bog?
The Cooksakraga bog.
The Cooksakraga boga?
No, the Cooksakraga bog bog.
The bog. Okay. I want to know, now that you've climbed all 46 high peaks, where should we go hiking next?
The Blue No.
Yeah, you want to just hike right here around home?
Yeah.
What about next year, though? Should we go back to the high peaks?
What about we just hike side?
Oh, in the Catskills?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. If you could go back and climb one peak in the high peaks, just one mountain that you could climb over again, what's the first one you'd want to go back to?
Cascade.
Cascade. Yeah. I bet you don't even remember Cascade. That was so long ago. All right. One more question.
Okay.
This is the last one.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would say to other kids that are going to go hiking in the high peaks? What would you tell them?
I would tell them I'm a 46'er.
But would you tell them that they can do it too?
Yeah.
What about girls? Do girls hike?
Yeah.
And do you think more girls should climb those mountains?
All of them.
All of the girls?
Yeah.
I think so too. All right. Thank you, TJ. Love you.
I think.